Good evening, everybody. It's John here from Tutor2U, welcoming you along to one of what hopefully will be three live streams we've got giving you exam advice. Tonight, we're concentrating on paper one for the obvious reason that paper one is coming up very soon. So we need to have some thoughts and some tips and some tricks about how to go about doing that as well as you can. We've got a very short PowerPoint presentation for you. If you find that useful and want to look at it again, the presentation will be available to you as soon as this live stream finishes. We've got one or two little questions for you as well, and we'd love to see your responses in the chat window if you feel as if you can answer those. If you're watching this on replay, welcome to you as well, and you obviously can start and stop this video as you see fit. Now, it's not me giving you advice tonight. It is Liz and Emily. Emily in the middle of the screen and Liz on the right-hand side. Good evening, both.
Hiya.
Hi.
Shall we get cracking?
Yeah, sounds like a good plan. Fab. So welcome everybody. We have got a really short presentation which we're going to run through for you. We're going to be here for about the next 20 minutes. This is going to be AQA focused. We're going to kind of jump a little bit in between the presentation and also try and keep an eye on the chat. So if you've got any burning questions, pop them in the chat. We'll do our best to answer them. And hopefully the information in the presentation will also be really helpful. So first of all, just to clarify, really important question. Do I need to answer all the questions on the paper? Hopefully, you know that the answer is yes. So all of the law papers for AQA are the same format, which makes it quite nice in terms of your approach to those papers. You've got those shorter questions. So you start off with your 5 multiple choice questions. You've then got a 5-mark explain question, a non-substantive question. You then have a 5-mark application question, 10-mark application question, and then that leads into those longer questions. So the longer questions are formed from that 15 marker, which generally is a concept or a theory, which you then have to link to a substantive area of law, and then you've got your 2 30 markers. So there are different ways that you can approach the paper, but what I thoroughly recommend to all of my students is that you start with the longer questions first. So they are the most demanding, they are where the majority of marks are, so therefore I would start with those longer questions and then go to the shorter ones. So just picking up on a couple of relevant questions in the chat. Someone's put, will contract be on paper 1? Won't. This is just the criminal law paper, and yeah, there's a bit of chat about what will come up as question 9. There's a lot of debate. So could it be fault, could it be justice, could it be theory? I think it was fault last year, so but I mean you have to revise everything. You can't question on spot. Somebody's put, as long as it's not fair labelling or autonomy or correspondence, it's fine. It's important to revise them. You get no choice of questions. Something that somebody else has put, Matthew, thank you. English legislation isn't worth too much, but I'd revise it to try and get marks. All of the non-substantive stuff is worth 25% of the marks. So 75% of the marks are from the substantive content on those longer questions, your question 8. You do also have 2 substantive multiple choice questions, so I definitely focus on that. So if we could pop to the next slide, that would be great. So a couple of people have put in the chat what topics involve causation and which do not. That's a really important question. You don't have to go through causation for every single offence. So you don't need to do causation for assault or battery. You do for ABH, GBH and wounding, because you have to prove that that level of injury has been caused. You also do need to do causation for murder and involuntary manslaughter because death has to have been caused, but you don't need to do it for theft, you don't need to do it for robbery, you don't need to do it for attempts. Okay, so if we could go on to the next slide. That would be fab. So what is the best way to structure an offence in the 10-mark and 30-mark questions? So in the 10-mark or the 30-mark questions, unless you are advised differently, and it's really, really important, number 1 rule, be led by the question. Don't think, oh, I think I should do that, but the question's telling me something different. Always focus, do what the question asks you. There's no reason why they couldn't change the format of the question. It would be a bit mean, but it's important to respond to the question. Typically, generally, if you are going through an offence in a 10-marker or a 30-marker, you are going through the whole offence. So it's not the case that you are being assessed on your ability to judge at what point in an offence the offence fails or it's not satisfied and then stop. it's you work your way all the way through the offence, and you use that IAMC structure. If you're going through an offence, introduce your parties, say in relation to this defendant and this victim, they might be charged with this offence, and say where it is contained. It's really important to say might be guilty because you haven't discussed it yet. You then work your way through the actus reus and the mens rea and conclude. And it's really important that you're explaining and you're applying each of the elements. Really, really important that in your explanation, you're only explaining law that is relevant, and your application is the key element. So for 10 markers, 3 marks are for explanation of your law. And 7 is for application. And in the 30 markers, question 10 marks are for explanation, 20 is application. So just to pick up on a couple of questions in the chat, someone has said, should I revisit some of my year 12 content? Definitely. You have to revise absolutely everything. Somebody's asked how many marks are general defences worth on average. It's really hard to quantify in that way because you don't know where they're going to come up. So one of the challenges about the AQA paper is that we don't know what's going to come up where. So you could have a 10 marker just on a defence. You could have a 10 marker just on not a general defence, but you could have a 10 marker, for example, just on loss of control. Equally, it could be part of a longer question. It could be part of a 30 marker, in which case then it doesn't have specific aspects which are allocated to it. So somebody has asked what questions can come up on question 9 for paper 1. So typically that is a concepts or a theory question. So for each paper you have to learn certain concepts and the theory that's outlined on that specification. So you've got the theory of law aspects, and then you've also got fault and justice. So I always say this to my students, literally said it to them today, revise all that substantive content first, because that's worth 75%. Then you revise the theory and the concepts, and then you do the non-substantive last. Really important if you're going on those, you're going for those really high marks, that you do revise everything, but you really should start with substantive. Fab. If we could go along to the next slide. Keep on popping questions in the chat as and when they come up. So here are some of the questions that we had from the grade booster. I'm just going to answer George's question as it's popped up. So why isn't causation required for battery or assault? So it's because it's the act that is being criminalised. It is the act of causing apprehension, or it is the application of force. You don't have to prove causation for those offences. So Ford has said, what would be the best way to explain the actus reus in a 30 marker? That completely depends upon the what offence it is. You should always structure your actus reus in terms of you explain and apply the individual elements. So I wouldn't recommend explaining all of the actus reus for an offence and then doing all of the application. So for example, with unlawful act manslaughter, you have to prove the unlawful act, then that it's dangerous, then that it is the cause of death. You need to explain and apply each of those elements individually. Okay, so one more question we've got from Stace, and then we'll go to the grade booster questions, but do keep popping them in the chat. Stace has said, what's the difference between substantive and non-substantive? So substantive is your criminal, your tort, and your contract, and substantive principles of law are these principles of law that can be enforced in the courts. Non-substantive topics, that's your statutory interpretation, your judicial precedent, English legal system, lawmaking. So those smaller topics. On the AQA specification, on the very final pages, you can see how those topics are broken down across the papers. But yeah, I would recommend for the criminal paper, you start revising that criminal law first, etc. So Katie has popped in some questions about the new gross negligence manslaughter test. So yeah, there has been an addition to gross negligence manslaughter. The case of Broughton now requires that you prove that there is a serious and obvious, a reasonably foreseeable, serious and obvious risk of death. And you simply approach that as one of the elements. Popping on to Bella then. So Bella has asked if one of the factors raised for an offence isn't satisfied, should you carry on explaining? Yes, definitely. It's kind of like maths in the sense, not that there's any numbers, but in the sense that you kind of you're also getting marked when you're working out. So it doesn't matter if you come to the correct, necessarily matter too much if you come to the wrong conclusion on one aspect. They want to see how you work your way all the way through that offence, even if one particular element is satisfied. Rayan has asked, when do we mention theories for question 9? So theories refers to the specific theory question. So there is a theory of criminal law point on the specification, and it will be really obvious if they're referring to that. Justice, there aren't really theories for fault. Just need to give examples of fault-based liability, non-fault-based liability. It's only really for justice that you bring that in. We've then got a Nagad. Emily might want to chip in on some of these as well. Here we've got Emily. How can we tell if there is an attempt? What advice would you give there?
So you're looking for several things. You're looking to see whether a person has gone beyond merely preparatory, which means that a person has gone beyond, for instance, buying a weapon, stalking a person. That would be classed as merely preparatory. Following that, you would look for examples of how they have gone beyond mere preparation and attempted to commit the actual crime itself. So if I use the example of murder, not only have they bought a weapon or bought the poison, stalked the victim, they have also gone to their home and poured the poison in somebody's drinking glass and then given it to the person. So that's what you are looking for, those two things. You are looking for evidence that they've done the preparation, but they've gone beyond that. And that's how you would apply. You would discuss evidence from the scenario and pick out quotes from the scenario that indicate that they've gone beyond simply preparing to commit that crime, and they have actually attempted to commit the full offence itself.
Perfect, thanks. Yeah, and I think just to add in there as well, something which students can get confused about is how do they know there's an attempt in a scenario? What you're looking for is I don't want to use the word attempt, I want to think of a better word here, but is that they've tried to commit an offence but they haven't succeeded. So they have taken action in order to commit something but they weren't successful for whatever reason. If there is a try, an attempt, and then they don't succeed, that is what indicates you go through an attempt. So another question here is, if you don't address all situations in a 30-mark question, can your marks be capped? That's a really good point. So part of the challenge with these 30 markers is addressing and identifying what you've got to go through. They are marked. You get the approach of the marking is actually that different offences are different indicative content groups, and your answer on a particular area will get graded as excellent, good, satisfactory, limited, or minimal. And then if there were 3 indicative content groups in the answer, then your mark gets calculated according to how you have banded on those different areas. So if you do miss out, say, a third, say there's 3 offences for you to go through, and you miss out 1, that is going to cap your answer at a certain mark. What I would say is that if you do misjudge timings a little bit and you get to the 30 mark and you think, I've only got 20 minutes left, I mean, the tip is do the 30 markers first. I can't emphasize that strongly enough. But you get to the end and then you think, oh, actually, I've only got 20 minutes left for this 10 marker. I've got 3 things to go through. What do I do? Do I go through 1 or 2 really in detail? Or do I do 3 at a bit more of a superficial level? I would really recommend the breadth rather than the depth. So Leo has asked, what structure do I use to write a 30 marker? You engage with the offences and defences that you are required to discuss in accordance with the question. So another question we've got here, I'll bounce this one over to Emily. Can you go through section 20 and section 18 GBH? So a bit of confusion about what is the difference between those two.
Yeah, sure. So they're very similar in the end result. For instance, the actual injury that you might cause to the victim. So you only have to cause a wound or GBH. GBH is really serious harm. A wound is anything that causes external bleeding. So the end result for the victim can be the same regardless of whether it's a Section 20 or 18 offence. The difference comes from the mens rea most of the time. So Section 18 is more serious than Section 20 because it requires intention. You have to intend to cause really serious harm to the victim. Simply being reckless isn't enough to satisfy this offence, and that's why there's a higher maximum sentence for Section 18. It's actually the same as murder, it's life imprisonment. Well, it's discretionary, but it's up to life imprisonment. Whereas for Section 20, it actually carries the same maximum sentence as you would get if you caused a victim ABH. It's a maximum of 5 years. And that's because of the fact that the mens rea can be satisfied through recklessness. You can intentionally or recklessly cause simply some harm. You don't even have to intend or be reckless as to cause GBH or a wound. You simply have to intentionally or recklessly cause some harm. And that's the phrase that you should use. So Section 20, intentionally or recklessly causing some harm. Section 18, intentionally causing GBH. That's the difference between the mens reas, and that's the difference between the offences. Hope that helps.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect. What I always say to my students is when you see GBH in a scenario, because students tend to see GBH or an injury that amounts to GBH, and then they think, oh, that's really bad, it's really severe. So say they cause somebody to suffer from serious brain damage, and they go, oh, that must be Section 18 because that GBH is really bad, and it's not. I say you need to, once you've identified GBH or wounding, you have to keep a completely open mind. It could be 18 or 20, and actually it's the mens rea that makes a difference. So then when you're working out which offence it is, look to that mens rea. So we've got a few more questions. We'll go through, we've got about 5 minutes left. We'll go through a couple more questions, and then we've got some true or false things on the PowerPoint to finish off with. So one question here, how do you write a question 10 that is split into 4 different areas because it's only 30 marks? Isn't it too much to write for 36 minutes ideally? Really good question. I always say to my students that you should spend 40 minutes on each 30 marker. So you get 120 minutes, but 100 marks. So it's roughly a mark a minute, and you've got an extra 20 minutes. Spend that extra time on those 2 longest questions. So they are the ones where you've got the most scope to gain the most marks. So spend about 40 minutes on each of those questions. You need a good 2 to 4 minutes of annotating, highlighting the scenario and the question, writing a bit of a plan, and then you start answering the question. So spend 40 minutes on those, a mark per minute on all the shorter ones. What I would also say is it could be that maybe there's only 3 things in a 30 marker, and then a later paper could have 4 things in a 30 marker. What I would really say is that if you are required to go through lots of things, in terms of the mark scheme, less depth will be required. So that will be accounted for in the mark scheme. You need to make a judgment about if you've only got, say, 2 areas to go through, which is unlikely in criminal for a 30 marker. Does happen in other papers, but if you've only got 2 things to go through, you go through that in lots and lots and lots more detail. If you've got 4 things to go through, it's about breadth. And also in any AQA exam, every single time, it is really important that you only go into lots of detail on discussion on elements that are contentious, elements that are in debate. So if you had a murder scenario and actually actus reus was really straightforward, and really obviously the defendant was the only cause of the death, you don't need to spend pages and pages going through causation. You deal with it really quickly. There's no point writing in detail about novice actus interveniens that aren't there. So it's all about being really kind of perceptive in, well, this is clearly an issue that requires a bit more discussion. So we'll go for 2 more questions, and then we'll go to our true or false. How many cases needed in a 30 marker to get to the top band? It's actually not quantified in that way at all. So mark schemes don't say they have to have this specific number of cases. I would say to my students, if you're really wanting a high grade, try to get at least, say, about 8 to 10 cases in there. But you can actually achieve quite high grades with only a lower range of cases. But I would just get as many as you can. Last question then, can you bullet point your answers if you're running out of time? Yes. If you are running out of time, just get down whatever you can in whatever format. You don't have to worry about it. It's the examiner that's marking it who does. Fab. Those were some really, really, really great questions. So we've got a couple of little last bits on our PowerPoints, which we are going to run through, which I will pass over to Emily for.
Thank you very much. All right, this is a quick true or false, so fingers ready on the chat. True or false, you need to include section numbers and the year when you include Acts of Parliament. Just pop your answer in the chat quickly. Tell me whether you think that the answer is true or false. And we'll see how many people get it right. So you need to include section numbers and the year if you are including Acts of Parliament in your answer. Ooh, people seem to be a bit indecisive here. Let's get the answer up. There we go. Well done, Ryan. True, it is true. Where you can, you should include section numbers in the year for Acts of Parliament. You don't need to do the same for cases, however. So it's not always important to include the dates for cases, but for Acts of Parliament, you should include them. Let's move on to the next. True or false, you need to answer all questions. This should be easy since Liz mentioned this at the beginning. So again, pop your answers in the chat. Lots of answers coming through now. Okay, most people have said true. Let's get the answers. Yep, well done. We were listening there to your teachers and to Liz. Yes, you do need to answer all questions. There aren't any choices. Okay, next one. You must include case facts and dates when referring to case law. What do we think? So case law is cases that have established a legal principle. Do you need to include the case facts, i.e. what happened, a description of the case, as well as dates when you're referring to the cases? So again, most people saying true. Let's get the answer up. False, that one. A couple of people said false, so well done if you were one of those. You do not have to mention case facts unless the facts are actually relevant to the point that you are making. So, for instance, if you were referring to statutory interpretation as an example, sometimes the case facts are necessary for you to explain the legal principle. But a lot of the time, you don't need to say what happened in detail if you just need to explain the legal principle. So for instance, if you were referring to Smith and you were saying that cutting a person's ponytail off amounts to ABH, or Chanfuc or Ireland and serious psychiatric injury amounted to ABH or something like that, you don't need to explain how that injury happened and what happened and the details of the dispute beforehand and that type of thing. You simply need to say the legal principle, which was, it was identified in this case that this was this, and move on. You will waste time if you go through all of the case facts before you explain the point. Okay, next, true or false, and I think this is the last one. Paper 1 is on Friday the 26th of May on the morning. Is this true or false? This is an important one to know. Okay, let's get the answers up. Well done if you thought true. Paper 1 is in fact on Friday the 20th of May on the morning. If you didn't know that, it's definitely a date to write in your diary, maybe with a couple of reminders, if you weren't sure.
That's a really important question to know the answer to. But there were loads and loads of really good questions tonight. Thanks to everybody who sent them in. Apologies that we didn't have quite enough time to go through them all. We are going to do the same again for paper 2 and paper 3. So check out the Tutor2 website to see the dates for those. So I think we're on a couple of Sundays, the 4th and the 11th for paper 2 and paper 3. So hopefully you'll find those useful. If you have found tonight useful, please do give us a thumbs up in the YouTube chat, in the YouTube window. That'll help us get our message out there to as many people as we possibly can. Massive thanks to Liz. Massive thanks to Emily as well for answering your questions tonight and having a go at some of those PowerPoint questions as well. Wonderful stuff. We hope to see you very soon. But before we do see you next time, the very best of luck with your exams. Good luck, everybody.
Good luck.